The sun was sinking low behind the hills, painting the wide fields in gold, but the farmer stood alone at the edge of his land, leaning on his wooden fence. His farm was too big for one man. The fences stretched for miles, the barns stood half empty, and the soil demanded hands he did not have. His father once worked this land with a full family, with cousins, uncles, neighbors helping. But now he was the only one left. The man had posted a job ad weeks ago, hoping someone, anyone, would answer. Farm workers wanted, shelter and food provided. That was all he wrote. In his mind, he imagined strong young men arriving with rough hands ready for labor, or perhaps poor families in need of a chance. He expected wagons at his gate, voices calling out, the comfort of footsteps filling his silent farm. But the road remained empty. Every morning he checked the old mailbox. Nothing. Every evening he stared at the dusty road leading to town. No one came. The silence was heavy. At night, when the wind blew across the fields, the farm groaned like a dying creature. His barns creaked, his tools rusted, and the crops withered where no one came to water them. He thought about giving up, selling everything, leaving the farm behind. But where would he go? This land carried his father's sweat, his mother's tears, and his own blood. Walking away felt like betraying their memory. So he waited. One evening, as rain clouds gathered and thunder cracked, the farmer sat by the small fire in his kitchen. The storm outside raged stronger than usual, the kind of storm that chased even the bravest men indoors. He was finishing his meal when a sound broke through the storm. Knock, knock. The farmer froze. His farm never had visitors, not at this hour. The knocking came again, louder, desperate. He grabbed his lantern and stepped to the door. When he opened it, rain rushed in, soaking his boots. And there, standing in the downpour, were 5 figures cloaked in dark fabric. Their faces were hidden under hoods, but their shapes were strange, not quite human. The tallest among them stepped forward. She lowered her hood, and the farmer's breath caught in his throat. Her skin glowed faintly in the lantern light, pale with faint silver markings across her cheeks. Her eyes were large, glimmering with pain and hunger. She was not human. None of them were. Behind her stood 4 more women, younger, thinner, their cloaks torn by travel. Their eyes darted nervously, as if afraid of being chased. Each one carried sorrow in her face and exhaustion in her body. The tall one spoke, her voice trembling yet strong. "Please, we saw your light. We beg for shelter." The farmer tightened his grip on the lantern. His heart raced. Aliens, on his farm. He had heard stories, widows left behind after the war, survivors wandering with no home, no safety. Some said they were dangerous, others said they were cursed. He looked at their hands. No weapons, only dirt and scars. He looked at their faces. Not hate, only fear. Still, he hesitated. Letting strangers inside his home could mean trouble. What if soldiers came searching? What if neighbors saw them? Helping aliens was not a small matter. It could bring punishment. The youngest of the 5, barely more than a girl, stepped forward and whispered, "We have nowhere else to go. We are widows. We lost everything." The farmer felt something twist inside him. He remembered his own loss, the nights he buried his face in his hands after his family was gone. He knew the weight of being alone, of having no one to stand beside you. He lowered his lantern, and with a slow breath, he stepped aside. "You can stay, just for tonight." The widows bowed deeply, their cloaks dripping water onto his floor. They followed him into the barn, where he spread hay and blankets. They curled together, trembling, whispering words in a language he did not know. Later that night, as the storm howled and the widows slept, the farmer lay awake in his bed. His farm had always been empty, filled only with silence. But now, for the first time in years, there were voices in the dark. He stared at the ceiling and wondered, what have I just done? The storm outside eased, but inside his chest a new storm began. He had offered shelter to strangers, alien widows with haunted eyes. Would they be gone by morning? Or had his farm, long empty, just changed forever? And as he drifted into uneasy sleep, he did not know that this small act, opening his door to the desperate, would alter his life in ways he could never imagine. The morning sun broke through the clouds, filling the fields with a soft golden glow. The farmer rose from his bed after a restless night. His mind replayed the storm, the knocking on his door, the faces of the 5 alien widows. He half expected them to vanish by morning, like a strange dream. But when he stepped outside, he saw them. They were in the yard already, their cloaks laid out to dry, their silver-marked skin gleaming faintly under the light. The tallest one was carrying buckets of water from the well. Another was sweeping the barn floor with a bundle of branches tied together. 2 others were fixing broken fence posts with bare hands, lifting heavy wood as if it weighed nothing. The youngest was on her knees pulling weeds from the soil. The farmer stood still, surprised. He had not asked them to work. He had not expected anything. Yet here they were, moving with quiet determination, as if trying to prove something. He cleared his throat. "You don't have to." The tallest widow looked up. Her eyes, deep in silver, met his. "We cannot take shelter without giving back. To do nothing is shame." Her words were broken, her accent thick, but her meaning was clear. The farmer slowly nodded, unsure what to say. He brought out bread and milk from his kitchen, placing them on the table outside. The widows gathered around cautiously. They sniffed the bread, touched it carefully, their hands trembling. The youngest whispered something in their language. The others hesitated, fear in their eyes. The farmer frowned. "It's food," he said. "It will not harm you." The tallest woman broke off a piece and held it in her mouth. For a moment her face tightened as though expecting pain, but then her eyes softened. She swallowed. Slowly the others followed. Relief spread among them as they ate hungrily, their fingers shaking from hunger more than fear. The farmer watched in silence. These women were not warriors, not threats. They were broken people, hungry, lost, widows. When they finished, the youngest turned to him and whispered, "Thank you." It was the first word she had spoken in his language, and it struck him harder than he expected. The day passed with uneasy peace. The widows worked quietly, repairing things he had ignored for months. They moved together like a unit, as if bound by the same grief. The farmer noticed how they never laughed, never smiled, never raised their voices. Their silence was heavy, like stones pressed into the earth. At dusk, as the farmer walked the edge of his field, he found the youngest widow sitting alone on a fence, staring into the horizon. Her eyes were wet, though she tried to hide it. He approached carefully. "You miss your home?" She nodded without looking at him. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Home is ashes. Men gone. We only run now." The farmer's chest tightened. He wanted to ask more, but he saw the pain in her eyes and let the silence stay between them. That night, the widows gathered in the barn again. The farmer stayed near the doorway, pretending to check on them, but really listening. They whispered, in their tongue, words heavy with fear. One phrase repeated several times caught his attention. Though he did not know their full language, he had heard this word before in passing, from old soldiers' stories. Hunters. The tallest widow noticed him at the doorway. She stood and walked over, her silver eyes sharp in the lantern glow. For a moment she said nothing. Then, in halting human words, she spoke. "Danger comes. Not safe." The farmer frowned. "What danger?" She shook her head, her cloak brushing the straw. "Hunters, soldiers. They look for us. If they find, you burn too." Her words hit him like a hammer. He stepped back, heart pounding. Taking them in meant more than feeding strangers. It meant drawing enemies to his land. It meant risking his farm, his life. Before he could answer, she reached out and touched his sleeve. Her voice lowered. "Please, just a little time. We leave soon." The farmer looked at her hand on his arm, then at her eyes. He saw no malice, only desperation. Still, her warning chilled him. That night, as the widows lay down in the barn, the farmer returned to his house. He could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the same question echoing in his mind. What have I brought onto my land? The farm that once felt empty now carried whispers of danger. 5 strange guests had entered his life, and with them, shadows of something far larger. As the wind rattled his windows, he felt it in his bones. The peace of his quiet farm would not last. The days that followed were different from anything the farmer had known in years. His land, once silent and still, now carried movement and voices. The 5 widows did not sit idle. From the first light of morning until the last glow of sunset, they worked. The farmer woke to the sound of tools striking wood, of buckets sloshing with water, of soft voices speaking in their strange tongue. The widows rose before him, their steps quiet, their hands already busy. They mended broken fences, cleared the overgrown paths, and pulled weeds from the garden. Even without proper tools, they moved with determination, as if the work itself gave them a reason to breathe. The farmer watched from a distance at first, unsure what to think. He was not used to anyone else on his land. For years, his farm had been a place of silence, a prison of memories. But now, everywhere he looked, the widow's presence was felt. They worked with grace, but there was something heavy in their eyes, something no amount of labor could wash away. One afternoon, he saw the youngest widow by the river that ran through the edge of his field. She knelt in the mud, scrubbing clothes in the water. Her small hands shook and tears ran silently down her cheeks. She thought no one saw her. The farmer almost walked away, but something in him froze. He had seen that kind of grief before, in the mirror, long after burying his family. He approached slowly, his boots crunching on the stones. The girl startled, wiping her face quickly, pretending nothing had happened. "You don't have to hide it," he said softly. Her lips trembled. "Widows must be strong," she whispered. "But inside, it hurts always." The farmer said nothing. He only sat on a rock nearby, letting her know she wasn't alone. They stayed like that for a long while, the sound of the river filling, the silence between them. That night, the widows gathered in the barn again, speaking in hushed tones. The farmer brought them food, bread, beans, and fresh milk. They accepted with quiet bows. The tallest widow looked at him, her silver eyes holding something deeper than thanks. She said, "Work heals the body, but the heart." She paused, pressing a hand to her chest. "The heart remembers too much." The farmer thought of his father's voice, his mother's laughter, the family he had buried. He nodded slowly. "Yes, the heart remembers." Over the next days, the farmer began to notice something else. The widows were not just workers. They carried scars beyond the skin. One bore burns along her arms, hidden under her sleeves. Another flinched whenever a door slammed, as if expecting violence. The youngest often woke in the night crying, though she tried to smother her voice in the straw. They were broken hearts walking in living bodies. Yet still, they gave all their strength to the farm. Together, they planted new seeds in the barren soil. They repaired the broken barn roof, climbing with balance as though they had done it all their lives. The farm slowly came alive. Green shoots rose from the ground. The fences stood straight again. The sound of hammering replaced the old silence, but with the work came whispers of fear. Some nights the farmer found the widows awake, whispering to one another in their language. He recognized only one word: hunters. Every time he heard it, his stomach tightened. One evening, after supper, the youngest widow spoke suddenly. Her voice was small but clear. "We are not safe here," the farmer frowned. "Why?" She lowered her head. "The ones who took our husbands, they search for us. They want to chain us. We run, but they always follow." The barn grew silent. The tallest widow placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, silencing her. Then she turned to the farmer. "You, give us food, shelter. We will not forget. But danger walks behind us." You must know this." The farmer's chest grew heavy. He looked at their faces, tired, scarred, afraid. He had let them in, and now their shadows had become his shadows. His farm, once empty, now carried not only life but also risk. That night, he sat on his porch staring at the horizon. The air smelled of earth and rain. He thought of the widows working with bare hands, of their broken voices, of the way they carried grief as if it were another limb. He thought of his own loneliness, the years he had lived in silence. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. And that frightened him, because deep inside he knew, if the hunters came, it would not be only their lives in danger, it would be his too. The wind rustled through the crops, and he whispered to the night, "What have I brought into my home?" But even as he asked, he already knew the answer. He had brought in more than guests. He had brought in 5 broken hearts, and whether he wished it or not, they were part of his farm now, and the world outside would not let that remain in peace. The nights grew heavier with silence, but it was not the peaceful kind. The farmer noticed it first when his dogs barked wildly at the edge of the fields. They were loyal animals, not known to cry at shadows, yet their fur bristled and their teeth showed as if something unseen lingered beyond the fence. The widows reacted differently. At the sound of the dogs, they froze. Their eyes widened, their hands tightened on whatever tool they held. The youngest grabbed the arm of the tallest one, whispering rapidly in their tongue. Though the farmer could not understand their words, he could feel the fear in them. That night, the farmer stayed awake longer than usual. He sat on his porch with his old rifle across his lap. The stars were hidden behind clouds, and the fields seemed darker than ever. The widows huddled in the barn, but their whispers carried through the night. One word rose again and again, clear even to his untrained ear. Hunters. He gritted his teeth. He had hoped their fear was only memory, only ghosts chasing them in their minds. But the way the dogs barked, the way shadows moved along the distant tree line, it felt too real. The following day, as the widows worked in the field, the farmer walked to town. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to listen. In the marketplace, men spoke in low tones of patrols seen on the old highway, of strange lights in the sky at night. Some claimed the Empire had sent drones searching for escaped property. The farmer's blood ran cold. He bought what he needed quickly and hurried back home. When he returned, he found the widows gathered near the well, their silver eyes watching the horizon. They were tense, their bodies ready as though expecting a storm. The tallest one met his gaze. "They are close," she said quietly. The farmer's chest tightened. "How do you know?" Her voice shook but did not break. "We smell the air. We hear the machines. We feel the ground." The others nodded, confirming her words. It was not superstition, it was instinct, sharpened by survival. That night he lay in bed, but sleep would not come. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind against the window made his heart pound. He rose at midnight, lantern in hand, and walked toward the barn. Inside, the widows were awake, kneeling in a circle. Their hands were clasped, their heads bowed, speaking in soft voices. A ritual, a prayer, or perhaps both. He did not understand the words, but the sorrow in their voices was enough to chill him. The youngest noticed him at the door. She whispered something, and the tallest widow stood. She approached him slowly. "You should send us away," she said in broken words. The farmer frowned. "And leave you to die out there?" She shook her head. "If we stay, danger comes here, you burn with us." He stared at her, the weight of her warning pressing against him. But he saw the others behind her, thin and tired, their eyes hollow. Send them away? Into the cold, into the hands of soldiers, or worse? His throat tightened. "No," he said firmly. "Not while I have a roof to give." For a moment her silver eyes searched his face, as if testing his resolve. Then she lowered her head. "Then we fight together." The farmer did not know what she meant by fight. But the next day he began to notice small changes. The widows no longer worked only on the farm. They walked the fences at dusk, watching the horizon. They gathered stones and sharpened wood into spears. One even repaired his old traps and set them near the edge of the fields. They were preparing. By the third night, the signs could not be ignored. Strange lights flickered in the sky, moving too straight, too sharp to be stars. The dogs howled until their throats were raw, and in the distance, faint but real, came the hum of machines. The farmer sat on his porch, rifle in his lap, sweat on his brow despite the cold air. He looked at the widows in the yard, their silver-marked faces glowing faintly in the starlight. They stood shoulder to shoulder, silent but unyielding. He realized then that these were not just broken women seeking shelter. They were survivors of something far worse than he could imagine. And if hunters truly came, they would not run. The wind swept across the fields, carrying the smell of metal and smoke. The farmer's heart pounded. His quiet farm was no longer just his own. It had become a place of refuge, of danger, of whispers that warned of war creeping closer. And in that moment he knew one truth. The emptiness of his land was gone forever. In its place, a storm was coming, and he would have to stand in the middle of it. The morning came heavy with tension. The farmer could feel it in the air like the stillness before thunder. The widows did not laugh, did not whisper to each other as they sometimes did. They moved quickly, gathering water, sharpening wood, stacking supplies in corners of the barn. Their every movement said one thing: prepare. The farmer walked among them, rifle in hand. His heart was uneasy. He had offered shelter out of pity, out of kindness, but now the weight of that choice pressed on him harder than the sun over his fields. At noon, the quiet was broken by the rattling of his old radio. He hadn't touched it in months, but a voice now crackled through the static. Attention, rural farmers. Report any alien refugees. They are dangerous. They bring disease. If you shelter them, your property will be seized. The farmer froze, his hands tightening around the radio. His neighbors would hear the same warning. He imagined them turning suspicious eyes toward his farm, watching for strange movements, waiting for a chance to point fingers. The youngest widow entered the kitchen just then, her silver-marked face pale. She looked at the radio, then at him. Her lips trembled, but she spoke clearly. "They come soon." He turned the radio off, his jaw tight. She was right. That evening, as the widows gathered hay for the animals, the farmer's nearest neighbor arrived on horseback. The man's eyes were sharp, his voice laced with curiosity. "Strange folk been seen on your land," he said. "Silver-skinned. Women, you seen 'em?" The farmer's heart pounded. He could lie, send the widows away in a breath, and the danger would pass. But then he looked at the barn, where the widows worked quietly, their thin figures moving in the fading light. Broken souls, yes, but honest ones. They had given life back to his land. They had asked for nothing but shelter. He forced a calm smile. "Only crows and foxes here," he said. "Nothing worth a soldier's trouble." The neighbor narrowed his eyes, as if weighing the words. But finally he shrugged and rode away, leaving dust and suspicion in his wake. When the farmer returned to the barn, the tallest widow was waiting for him. She had seen the neighbor, heard the conversation. She bowed her head. "You risk much for us." The farmer's voice was rough. "I made a choice. I won't undo it now." For the first time, he saw her lips curve into the faintest smile. It was not joy but gratitude mixed with pain. "Then we stand with you." That night, as the stars blinked weakly through drifting clouds, the farm was quiet again. But it was not the silence of emptiness, it was the silence before battle. Near midnight, a sudden howl tore through the stillness. The farmer's dogs barked furiously, their cries echoing across the fields. The widows leapt to their feet, their eyes glowing faintly in the lantern light. The youngest ran to the farmer, clutching his arm. "They are here." He raised his rifle, his hands steady, though his heart hammered like a drum. "Get inside," he ordered. But the tallest widow shook her head. Her voice was firm. "We do not run. We fight." The farmer stared at her, shocked. He had seen them work, seen them repair, seen them grieve. But fight? He doubted their strength against soldiers, yet in her eyes burned something unshakable, a fire born of loss. She had lost her husband, her home, her world. She had nothing left to fear. The farmer lowered his rifle slightly. He realized this was no longer only his farm. It was their home now too, and protecting it was not his burden, alone. The sound of engines grew louder, rolling like distant thunder. Red lights flashed through the trees at the edge of the field. Shadows moved closer, heavy boots pressing the soil. The farmer raised his rifle again, stepping forward. The widow stood behind him, silent and strong. For a moment, the world held its breath. His farm, once an empty place of grief, now stood as the line between freedom and chains. He whispered to himself, but the widows heard. This is my land, and no one takes what I protect. The choice was made. The night was thick with shadows when the first hum of engines cut through the silence. The farmer's heart pounded as he stood on his porch, rifle in hand. The widows were gathered in the yard, their silver-marked faces glowing faintly under the lantern light. None of them spoke, but their eyes were hard with resolve. The sound grew louder. Lights appeared between the trees, red, sharp, mechanical. Soldiers, the hunters. The dogs barked madly, pulling at their chains. The widows stiffened, their bodies tense, ready. The youngest widow gripped a wooden spear she had carved, though her hands trembled. The farmer swallowed hard. He had lived a life of soil and sweat, not battle. Yet tonight, his quiet land was no longer just a farm. It was a battlefield. The first troop carrier rolled into view, its headlights slicing through the dark. 10 soldiers marched out, their armor gleaming, their boots heavy on the soil. Each carried weapons that glowed faintly in the night. The farmer raised his rifle, but his hands shook despite his will. The leader stepped forward, voice harsh through a metal mask. By order of the Empire, surrender the fugitives, 5 alien widows, property of the crown. The farmer's jaw tightened. He glanced at the widows. They stood behind him, silent but unyielding. He knew what surrender meant: chains, suffering, and perhaps death. He lifted his rifle higher. This is my land. No one here is your property. The soldier laughed coldly. Then you die with them. The order was given and chaos erupted. Shots cracked through the night. Energy bolts slammed into the dirt, sending sparks flying. The farmer fired his rifle, the kick jolting his shoulder. One soldier dropped, clutching his chest. But more poured forward. The widows moved faster than he expected. The tallest charged into the fight, grabbing a soldier's arm and twisting until the weapon snapped free. She struck with her bare hands, her strength unnatural, sending the soldier sprawling into the mud. Another widow darted past the farmer, her body swift like a shadow. She threw a sharpened spear, striking a soldier in the leg. His scream cut the night and he fell. The farmer's breath came fast. He reloaded, fired again, dropped another attacker. But the soldiers pressed harder, their numbers overwhelming. Then, something strange happened. The widows began to glow faintly, silver lines along their skin shimmering in the darkness. Their eyes blazed as they fought, as if grief itself gave them power. They moved with fury, each strike fueled by pain, by memory, by loss. One widow let out a cry that shook the air, a sound not human, not earthly. It froze the soldiers for a heartbeat, just long enough for the farmer to fire again. Still, the fight was brutal. A bolt struck the barn, flames licking at the dry wood. The animals panicked, breaking loose. Smoke rose into the sky, filling the air with choking heat. The youngest widow stumbled, nearly struck by a soldier's blade. The farmer lunged forward, pulling her back and firing point blank. The soldier fell, and the girl's eyes widened, with shock. She whispered, Why save me?" The farmer gritted his teeth. "Because you're mine to protect." The battle raged on. The widows fought side by side with him, not as guests, but as warriors of his farm. Their hands were Scarred, their hearts broken, but their strength was fierce. Together they drove the soldiers back, step by step. At last the leader raised a signal flare, its red light bursting against the clouds. "Fall back," he shouted. "We'll return with more." The surviving soldiers retreated, dragging their wounded into the carrier. Engines roared, and the machine vanished into the dark, leaving the farm in smoke and silence. The farmer collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. His rifle was nearly empty, his body bruised and burned. The widows gathered around him, their clothes torn, their silver skin marked with cuts. Yet their eyes were alive, burning with something he had never seen before. Hope. The tallest widow knelt beside him. Her voice was soft but steady. "You stood with us. You chose us. Now we are yours, as you are ours." The farmer looked at his land. The barn smoldered, the fields scarred, fences broken once again. His farm had suffered, but it still stood. And so did they. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the widows, their faces glowing faintly in the smoky light. For the first time he understood. They were no longer strangers, no longer just guests. They were family born not of blood but of battle. And though the empire would come again stronger and angrier, he knew one thing with certainty. Together, they would be ready. The night air cooled, carrying the smell of ash and earth. The farmer rose slowly, gripping his rifle. Around him the widows stood like pillars of silver fire, unbroken, unyielding. The invasion had come, and they had survived. But this was only the beginning. The dawn came slow, dragging light across the battered farm. Smoke still curled from the half-burned barn, and the soil was scarred with footprints, blood, and ash. The farmer stood at the edge of the fields, his rifle heavy in his hands, his eyes tired but alive. Behind him the widows worked silently. Despite their wounds and exhaustion, they moved with purpose. One fetched water to cool the smoking barn. Another guided the frightened animals back into their pens. The youngest, her hands trembling, helped mend the fence the soldiers had broken. Their bodies were weary, but their will was unbroken. The farm had survived, though it would never be the same. As the farmer watched them, a deep truth sank into him. These women were no longer strangers who had begged for shelter at his door. They had fought beside him, they had bled on his soil, they had chosen to stand when others would have run. The tallest widow approached, her silver eyes steady despite the cut across her cheek. "You should send us away," she said softly. "The hunters will return with more. If we stay, you will lose everything." The farmer shook his head. His voice was rough but firm. "I already lost everything once, I won't lose it again. This is your home now, as much as it is mine." For the first time, true emotion flickered in her face. Her lips trembled, not with fear, but with something close to gratitude. She bowed her head. "Then we are yours. Family, not guests." The word family struck him harder than any bullet. It had been years since he had heard it spoken with meaning. His chest tightened, and for a moment he could not speak. By midday, neighbors began to arrive, drawn by the smoke and the sound of the battle. At first their eyes widened at the sight of the silver-skinned widows working openly in the fields. Whispers spread quickly, fear, suspicion, doubt. But when they saw the soldiers' weapons scattered in the dirt, when they saw the scorch marks on the ground, their whispers changed. The farmer stood tall and told them what had happened. They came for these women. They called them property. But here they are free. They fought for this land as much as I did. Without them, I would be dead. Without them, you might be next. The neighbors shifted uneasily. Some muttered that the farmer was foolish, that he was drawing danger on them all. But others, seeing the widow's wounds and the strength in their eyes, said nothing. Slowly, a few stepped forward, offering tools, buckets of water, even food to help repair the damage. The farmer felt something stir in the air. Respect. Not for him alone, but for the widows as well. Days passed, and the farm began to heal. The barn was rebuilt with the neighbors' help. The fences stood straighter than before, and the field sprouted with new life. The widows worked side by side with the farmer, their laughter faint at first but growing stronger with each day. The emptiness of the farm was gone, replaced by voices, footsteps, and warmth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the farmer sat with the widows on the porch. The youngest leaned against the railing, humming softly in her language. The tallest stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "They will come again," she said quietly. The farmer nodded. "Then we'll be ready." She turned to him, silver eyes glowing in the fading light. "We were widows, broken and lost. But you gave us more than shelter. You gave us a reason to fight again. You gave us a home." He met her gaze and spoke with a voice steady and true. "And you gave me back something I thought I'd never find again. Family." Silence settled over them, but it was not empty. It was the silence of belonging, of trust, of something new being built where there had once been only loss. As night fell, the farmer lit a lantern and placed it by the gate. Its glow spread across the road, a quiet message to anyone passing by. This land was no longer empty, no longer silent. It was guarded by bonds stronger than fear. The widows gathered around him, their silver-marked faces shining in the soft light. They were no longer only survivors. They were farmers, protectors, and kin. Together, they had endured the storm, and together, they would face whatever came next. The farmer looked over his land, scarred yet alive, and felt something he had not felt in years: hope. His farm was full at last.